Chào mừng các bạn đã quay trở lại với ngày cuối của sự kiện Think Games Việt Nam. Trong 2 ngày trước đó, chúng ta đã được nghe rất nhiều những thông tin bổ ích từ các diễn giả đến từ Google, đối tác và các công ty hàng đầu tại Việt Nam về cách tạo ra những trò chơi tuyệt vời, cách kết nối với người dùng. Và ngày hôm nay, hãy cùng trao đổi về cách thúc đẩy tăng trưởng kinh doanh tới một tầm cao mới. Với chủ đề này, chúng ta sẽ được nghe từ các chuyên gia của Google và các công ty games cùng các nhà đầu tư games về những công cụ hữu ích giúp mang lại sản phẩm của bạn tới thị trường lớn, những chiến lược và cách thực hành tốt nhất cho các loại hình doanh thu khác nhau, cách mở rộng quy mô xuất bản mô hình trò chơi free to play. Và trước khi chúng ta bắt đầu,
xin chúc mừng 3 người chơi có đáp án nhanh và chính xác nhất sẽ nhận được phần quà đặc biệt đến từ chương trình. Chúng tôi sẽ liên lạc lại và gửi đến các bạn trong thời gian sớm nhất.
Với mini games của ngày hôm nay, mỗi khung chữ bạn nhìn thấy trong màn hình biểu hiện cho một con số bí mật. Chúng tôi đã đưa ra 2 gợi ý đầu tiên. Các bạn nhớ chú ý theo dõi gợi ý cuối cùng để tìm ra câu trả lời đúng nhé. Và như thường lệ, hãy gửi cho chúng tôi đáp án của phần chơi thông qua phiếu phản hồi và trở thành người chiến thắng. Nào, chúng ta hãy cùng bắt đầu.
Hi, thank you all for joining. My name is Caro and I am part of the international growth team at Google. During day one, we presented the gaming market as a global arena and stressed why building your game for export is so important. Today, we'll be covering the how to go export, what insights, frameworks, and resources you can leverage when building your export plan. Before we jump into it, let's start with a quick recap. The sales that global game companies are collecting from overseas rather than their own countries are growing. This trend has strengthened this past year. Now we estimate that more than half of mobile game sales come from export. And with more companies expanding their footprint, competition is heating up. Marketing efforts become crucial to acquire gamers. The share of non-organic installs has increased across all regions. In some markets like Korea and Japan, this trend is even more prominent. In order to maximize the return of your efforts, it's important that you understand the global landscape and choose potential markets carefully. There are many variables to consider when prioritizing markets. I have written down some of the main factors we look at Google when recommending markets to our own advertisers, and I am probably even missing some. So let's try to simplify and complete this first step towards your market prioritization exercise. We can start by asking the fundamental questions. Number 1, which are the biggest markets for my type of game or genre? Number 2, which markets are currently growing? Number 3, which markets have the highest ROI? Number 4, which markets have the lowest barriers of entry? We can then map variables to help answer these. For today, let's take a look at the global gaming landscape through this lens and get some valuable insights along the way. Once we conclude this exercise across markets, we can shortlist a few and then follow up with specific market deep dives to prioritize which can be short and medium-term expansions. If we look at the biggest gaming markets in the world, we see countries that have a long history in gaming world, since arcade and console, and are at the forefront of the latest innovation in cross-device gaming. China, US, and Japan, the top 3 alone represent 60% of worldwide gaming revenue. What do some of these top 10 countries have in common? These have high internet penetration, long history with console games, high-end devices, investing in 5G, and they're building cloud infrastructure. Now, when we zoom into the mobile games market, new countries start to appear that have very different histories with gaming. And their size was built on their big population numbers and their mobile-first or mobile-only internet access segments. Emerging markets like India and Indonesia are already conquering the top 10. Compared to what can be considered the mature gaming markets, these have different economies, connectivity infrastructure, devices, even gamer preferences. And all of this means you'll have to evaluate making important changes to your game if you want to reach a massive audience. For example, we've seen developers from markets like Japan and Korea publish their game in Southeast Asia and fail to provide a good experience because their graphics and app size were not suitable for Tier 2 and Tier 3 devices used in this region. So keep this in mind as you plan to enter emerging markets. Now, size is attractive, but growth is very exciting. And in gaming, we see the perfect combination. Some of the biggest markets are also the ones growing the fastest. Mature markets are growing in monetization, while emerging markets are growing in installs. If we look at studies that project for the next 3 years, we expect Asia to bring the highest number of new gamers. India and China alone are expected to bring 40% of worldwide gamer growth. So we already talked about size and growth. Now let's talk about where you can find the most valuable players. When approaching this question, don't limit yourself to metrics such as average revenue per user. The markets with the highest ARPU are also the most competitive and have higher cost per installs. Think about value from a return over investment perspective. Is your game ready to generate the engagement needed to become profitable over time? If you still have elements you need to test, very expensive markets might result in very expensive tests. Another useful metric to consider when thinking about gamer value is the preferred monetization model in each market. So we already know that different game genres work with different monetization models. But even within one same genre, you can see some markets preferring in-app purchases and other markets preferring ads, as these are maybe more reluctant to pay for entertainment content. So think about how you will generate money in a way that is accessible for gamers. Even if the monetization mechanics are the same, at least consider adjusting pricing and using local currency. For example, in emerging markets like Indonesia and Thailand, we recommend lowering prices by about 30 to 40% versus mature markets like Japan or Korea. Let's go now to the fourth point to consider, barriers of entry. In gaming, language is one of the strongest barriers. A lot of developers and publishers test markets by launching their game in English first and then checking organic growth. But to really unlock massive volume and true engagement, localization is required. Good news is that once you unlock one language, many countries can open up. A clear example is Spanish. Maybe you're thinking about localizing your game to go to Mexico, but as soon as you translate to Spanish, you have many more countries that speak Spanish you can quickly go to. Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Spain, even segments like US Hispanics. But remember, localization is not just about language, but about other factors like cultural elements, seasonality, and adjusting the interface. We have seen many cases where games gave the wrong impression due to cultural clashes or miscommunicated with poor quality translations. So how do you apply all of this to your specific game and genre? When we run these market prioritization exercises for our own clients, we map variables like size, growth, value per user, entry barriers, and more in one table. Then we give a score based on what matches the game strengths best. We then shortlist a few countries and prepare a deep dive. The deep dive covers key factors when thinking about the go-to-market strategy, such as gamer demographics, content consumption preferences, potential KOL partnerships, competition, etc. Here you can see a quick one-pager overview for the US market. You can build similar ones for your markets of interest. Now you're probably wondering, how can I access relevant data? Where can I find sources of information to complete this type of analysis? Now, fortunately, Google is constantly building tools and resources that can help you collect data points you need for your analysis. The one I want to share with you today is Market Finder. This tool is open to everyone and contains custom market insights, recommendations, operational best practices across different levels, such as localization or customer experience, and tools to build your marketing strategies. For localization, I really encourage you to check out the country-specific guides. Even though Market Finder has been initially built for verticals such as e-commerce, it now has a section for apps business you can try. We are also uploading more and more gaming content and recommendations, so keep an eye on it. So to recap, 3 takeaways for you to remember from this session. First, the mobile gaming leaderboard is not occupied by mature markets only anymore. Emerging markets have reached an attractive size and are still in their vertiginous growth stage. Second, navigate planning complexity by building a scorecard across fundamental variables like size, growth, gamer value, and localization barriers. After this initial prioritization exercise, deep dive into the most attractive markets. And finally, explore Google Market Finder for insights, best practices, and resources that will help you in your planning and launch strategies. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you find it useful and can apply it to your planning.
Xin chào mọi người, cảm ơn team Google đã mời AB OneShop tham dự vào buổi Think Game ngày hôm nay để chia sẻ về chủ đề Hybrid Monetization.
Xin chào mọi người, mình là Hùng, Lead Marketing của team AB OneShop. Mình tham gia AB năm 2017, năm mà AB bắt đầu phát triển game global.
Còn mình là Phương, phụ trách mảng Monetize. Mình có 3 năm kinh nghiệm trong ngành game và hiện tại đang làm cho AB OneShop. AB là studio vừa sản xuất và phát hành game trên toàn cầu. Team mình có khoảng trên 90 nhân sự, trong đó thì team marketing chiếm khoảng 20%. Với lợi thế là nhân sự dồi dào thì team AB luôn sẵn sàng hợp tác với bất cứ team studio nào có sản phẩm chất lượng. Đến thời điểm hiện tại thì AB có khoảng 20 game in-house và 30 game phát hành với trên 20 studio trong và ngoài nước. Đối với AB nói riêng và OneShop nói chung thì sản phẩm mà bọn mình tự hào nhất có thể nói là điểm dấu nhấn của AB OneShop, đó là Galaxy Attack Alien Shooter, một game thuộc thể loại game shooting hay còn gọi là bắn ruồi. Đến thời điểm hiện tại thì game có trên 100 triệu lượt download và nằm trong top 50 game của thị trường US. Ngoài ra, bọn mình còn có những sản phẩm phát hành thành công như là Red Imposter trong tháng 1 vừa qua đã nằm trong top 1 US overall cũng như là trên toàn thế giới. Sau nhiều năm phát hành thì bọn mình có đúc kết lại được kinh nghiệm là để có một game có khả năng scale tốt thì chúng ta luôn cần phải tối ưu LTV lớn hơn CPI, phải dùng nhiều phương pháp tối ưu làm thế nào để LTV cao nhất có thể và CPI là phải thấp nhất có thể. Theo như anh Hùng, một người có 5 năm kinh nghiệm trong chạy UA thì làm thế nào để chúng ta có thể giảm CPI xuống thấp nhất có thể?
Xin chào các bạn. Với nhiều năm phát triển phát hành game ở thị trường global thì tôi thấy rằng là cái ngày xưa tôi chạy CPI rất là rẻ. Giá CPI thì nó chỉ 0.3 đô thôi. Nhưng mà đến thời điểm hiện tại thì giá CPI của con Galaxy Attack của chúng tôi chạy ở US thì nó đã lên đến hơn 1 đô. Thì cái điều đấy thì các bạn thấy rằng là cái thị trường hiện nay thì nó cái sức cạnh tranh rất là lớn. Đấy, chính vì vậy mà chúng ta cần phải làm nào để tối ưu cái CPI tốt nhất, không phải bằng cách là mình bid thấp xuống. Cái việc mà mình bid thấp xuống ấy, thì có thể ảnh hưởng đến cái việc mà skill cái sản phẩm ấy lên được cái volume lớn, có thể không thể đẩy top 1 được. Thì chính vì vậy mình không bid thấp, thậm chí có những lúc mà mình bid thấp xuống ấy, thì có thể nó ảnh hưởng đến cái chất lượng user. Thì chính vì vậy mà chúng mình không bằng cách mà bid thấp mà chúng mình phải để ý vào cái việc mà sáng tạo trong cái làm creative, đó là làm playable ấn tượng này, làm video banner ấn tượng để làm sao mà giúp cho cái tỷ lệ conversion tốt nhất có thể. Ngoài ra thì khi mà cái việc mà ngoài ra thì mình có thể tối ưu cái storytelling của mình tốt nhất bằng cách mà A/B test nhiều những cái icon, chọn ra những cái icon tốt nhất rồi screenshot, tìm ra những cái screenshot tốt nhất có thể bằng cách A/B test thật nhiều lần để chọn ra cái bộ mà tốt nhất. Khi mà cái việc tối ưu CI mà đã gặp khó khăn như vậy đấy, thì chúng tôi đã nghĩ ra một cái giải pháp khác là tìm cách tối ưu cái tăng cái LTV của sản phẩm lên. Thì sau đây thì Phương sẽ giúp mình phân tích và chia sẻ những kinh nghiệm để tối ưu cái LTV tốt nhất có thể.
Để maximize LTV thì team sản xuất bọn mình đã cố gắng thêm được những cái feature thật là ấn tượng trong game, cũng như là thêm event. Ngoài ra thì đã có một hướng đi khác và team mình đã thử và cảm thấy rất hiệu quả, đó là thêm in-app ads, một dòng tiền khác vào trong game. Thì sau đây mình xin được chia sẻ case study của game Galaxy Attack Alien Shooter. Trên đây là các chỉ số của game trong giai đoạn mới chỉ tập trung vào ERP. Thì pay rate thời điểm đó bọn mình có được là khoảng 1% và LTV global trung bình là 0.25%, 0.25 đô. Với LTV này thì khiến cho bọn mình gặp rất nhiều khó khăn trong quá trình scale, không thể tăng được ngân sách cũng như là không thể tiếp cận được đến những user ở những thị trường đang phát triển, bởi vì pay rate ở những thị trường đang phát triển là rất thấp. Để tăng được LTV thì bọn mình đã kết hợp với game design thêm in-app ads vào trong game, và nhờ đó mà bọn mình đã có thể có được doanh thu từ tất cả các active user. Điều này đã giúp cho overall LTV tăng và đã giúp cho bọn mình có thể scale game ở những thị trường đang phát triển, đã giúp bọn mình unlock được rất nhiều thị trường. Song song với đó thì ERP vẫn là công cụ để giúp bọn mình scale game ở những thị trường tier 1 như US, Hàn Quốc, Nhật Bản, Úc, Canada, những thị trường mà có pay rate cao. Và nhờ vào việc kết hợp giữa in-app ads và in-app purchase thì bọn mình đã có thể scale được toàn diện hơn. Cũng như là khi mà thêm in-app ads vào game thì user cũng có thể tiếp tục tiến trình chơi game của mình bằng cách là xem reward và tăng retention gián tiếp, giúp cho tăng khả năng paying ở late game sau. Show cho các bạn về các chỉ số của game sau khi mà thêm in-app ads vào để thấy được sự cải thiện. Thì như trên slide các bạn có thể thấy pay rate của bọn mình tăng gấp 2 lần, và đi đôi với đó là LTV cũng tăng được lên 2,3 lần, đã giúp cho game của bọn mình có khả năng scale lên được rất là cao. Và ở thời điểm hiện tại, game Galaxy Attack Alien Shooter chiếm khoảng 30% thị trường game bắn ruồi, và bọn mình đã có trên 120 triệu lượt download cho game. Để có cái nhìn bao quát hơn về hiệu quả của mô hình hybrid thì mình có biểu đồ sau đây. Biểu đồ về install của game từ giai đoạn 2017 cho đến thời điểm hiện tại. Thì vào đầu 2018 bọn mình bắt đầu áp dụng thêm in-app ads vào game. Thì các bạn có thể thấy lượng install tăng rất nhanh từ 2017 đến 2018, và bọn mình đã có thể giữ được mức volume scale ổn định cho đến tận thời điểm bây giờ. Điều này có thể cho thấy là cái hướng đi thêm in-app ads vào game của bọn mình là rất là phù hợp, đúng đắn. Cuối cùng thì bọn mình muốn list ra sau đây các key learning khi mà các bạn sử dụng in-app ads cũng như là mô hình hybrid. Đầu tiên là in-app ads giúp tăng overall LTV, tăng khả năng scale ở nhiều thị trường, đặc biệt là các thị trường game đang phát triển. Thứ hai là in-app ads giúp tăng cải thiện retention và gián tiếp tăng pay rate ở late game. Thứ ba là mình muốn remind lại mọi người những cái lưu ý khi mà chúng ta sử dụng in-app ads, bởi vì mọi người cũng có thể biết là in-app ads thì nếu mà sắp xếp không khéo thì nó sẽ ảnh hưởng xấu đến trải nghiệm người dùng. Nên là khi mọi người thêm in-app ads vào, chúng ta cần phải lưu ý chọn loại format ad cho phù hợp với game của mình. Hiện tại chúng ta có một số loại format ad phổ biến như là interstitial, banner và rewarded. Thì interstitial và banner có ảnh hưởng tương đối là tiêu cực đến trải nghiệm người dùng. Còn rewarded thì cũng gần như là một loại tiền tệ trong game. User phải bỏ ra đó là thời gian, và tùy vào từng con game, từng quốc gia, thị trường, và thì bọn mình sẽ có những cái sắp xếp và chọn lựa về format ad phù hợp. Và thậm chí là bọn mình còn segment ra user, paying user và non paying user để chọn được format ad cho phù hợp. Thứ hai là về tần suất, cần phải đảm bảo là cân bằng giữa việc thu tiền, kiếm tiền từ IAA và trải nghiệm người dùng. Thứ ba là cần lưu ý về các vị trí đặt quảng cáo. Trên đây là những chia sẻ của team Abi về chủ đề Hybrid Monetization. Cảm ơn các bạn đã lắng nghe. Cảm ơn Google vì buổi Think Game rất bổ ích ngày hôm nay.
Xin chào.
Xin chào.
Thân chào tất cả các bạn, mình là Nam đến từ team Google AdMob. Mình làm việc khá thường xuyên với các công ty game ở Việt Nam để giúp các công ty đó tối ưu doanh thu từ game cũng như phát triển game ra toàn cầu. Trong phần tiếp theo của chương trình ngày hôm nay, mình xin trình bày về chủ đề tối ưu doanh thu cho game bằng Google AdMob kết hợp với Firebase. Như các bạn cũng đã biết, ngành game tiếp tục có những bước phát triển mạnh. Các cơ hội mở ra rất nhiều nhưng kèm theo đó cũng có khá nhiều thách thức. Về phần cơ hội, có thể nói rằng thị trường game vẫn đang giữ được đà tăng trưởng tốt. Theo dữ liệu của Statista, tổng doanh thu cho game di động tăng nhanh trong những năm vừa qua. Tương tự như vậy, doanh thu trên mỗi người chơi game cũng đang trên đà tăng và chưa có dấu hiệu dừng lại. Số người chơi game cũng tăng, với số người chơi năm 2020 khoảng 1,65 tỷ, tăng hơn 20% so với năm 2019. Như vậy, tiềm năng của thị trường game di động còn khá nhiều. Tuy nhiên, việc tối ưu và tăng trưởng doanh thu cho game cũng có nhiều thách thức. Đầu tiên, thị trường game đang ngày càng cạnh tranh. Nhiều công ty game đi sâu vào việc phân tích hành vi người dùng và sử dụng nhiều dữ liệu để tối đa hóa doanh thu trên mỗi người chơi. Thứ hai, việc giữ chân người dùng luôn là yếu tố quyết định. Tuy nhiên, tương đối khó để cân bằng giữa việc tối ưu doanh thu mà vẫn đảm bảo trải nghiệm người dùng tốt. Các nhóm người dùng có hành vi rất khác nhau và thường áp dụng một chiến thuật duy nhất cho tất cả người dùng là không hiệu quả. Việc tìm kiếm cơ hội tăng doanh thu cho game cũng thường gặp khó khăn. Hiểu được khó khăn này của các công ty game, trong những năm qua, Google đã phát triển nhiều tính năng sản phẩm mới, trong đó đặc biệt chú trọng vào việc kết hợp dữ liệu người dùng với các thông số về doanh thu cho game, bao gồm cả quảng cáo và IAP. Chỉ cần liên kết AdMob với Firebase, các bạn hiện nay sẽ có thể dễ dàng thực hiện nhiều tác vụ quan trọng, chẳng hạn như phân tích và chia nhỏ tập người dùng. Việc này sẽ giúp bạn hiểu rõ hành vi của người dùng game của bạn và có thể có những phương án xử lý khác nhau đối với các tập người dùng khác nhau. Thực hiện A/B test để tối ưu về cả sản phẩm lẫn kinh doanh. Tăng doanh thu mà vẫn đảm bảo trải nghiệm người dùng tốt. Tại Google, bên mình đã làm việc với nhiều game studio trên thế giới để giúp họ tối ưu doanh thu hiệu quả qua việc sử dụng kết hợp AdMob và Firebase. Trong chương trình ngày hôm nay, mình xin chia sẻ một số trường hợp thành công đó. Đầu tiên là việc dùng A/B test để tìm ra kịch bản quảng cáo tốt nhất. Thứ hai là việc xây dựng những chiến thuật tốt nhất cho các tập người dùng khác nhau nhằm cải thiện trải nghiệm người dùng và tăng doanh thu. Thứ ba là việc chia nhỏ và phân tích luồng tương tác với quảng cáo để có thể tối ưu hiệu quả. Thứ tư là việc sử dụng Firebase Prediction trong tối ưu doanh thu. Sau cùng sẽ là giới thiệu về Cohort Report, một tính năng mới để đo đếm và tối ưu giá trị người dùng. Mình xin phép đi vào cụ thể từng ứng dụng trên đây. Đầu tiên là việc sử dụng A/B test để tìm ra kịch bản quảng cáo tốt nhất. Chắc hẳn các bạn đã tương đối quen thuộc với việc dùng Firebase A/B test để phân tích và tối ưu sản phẩm game của mình. Tuy nhiên, có thể nhiều bạn chưa sử dụng nhiều A/B test để tối ưu doanh thu từ quảng cáo hoặc IAP. Thay vì việc phải thiết lập phức tạp trong game của mình, việc kết hợp AdMob và Firebase A/B test cho phép bạn dễ dàng thực hiện các tác vụ sau. Thử nghiệm các kịch bản của quảng cáo khác nhau. Điều này bao gồm vị trí đặt quảng cáo, giới hạn tần suất, frequency capping, giá trị của quảng cáo trả thưởng và nhiều kịch bản khác. Việc thiết lập là tương đối dễ dàng. Bước đầu, bạn tạo 2 hoặc nhiều biến thể trên remote config và xác định số phần trăm traffic mà bạn muốn thử nghiệm. Sau đó, bạn chọn các chỉ số mà bạn muốn theo dõi, chẳng hạn như tương tác người dùng, user engagement, tỷ lệ giữ lại người dùng, retention rate, doanh thu quảng cáo và vân vân. Hệ thống sẽ tự động chạy và thống kê cho các bạn biết biến thể nào mang lại hiệu quả tốt nhất. Đồng thời, bạn cũng có thể xem các biến thể đó ảnh hưởng đến trải nghiệm người dùng ra sao. Ví dụ, bạn có thể xem sự thay đổi về thời gian chơi, về tỷ lệ giữ lại, hay việc người chơi có qua được level hay không. Sau khi so sánh doanh thu và quan sát ảnh hưởng đến trải nghiệm của người dùng, bạn có thể quyết định chọn kịch bản quảng cáo nào tốt nhất. Tiếp đến, mình xin chia sẻ một số trường hợp thành công, đó là Gagex, một công ty game ở Nhật với tựa game Olden Card 2. Gagex đã sử dụng AdMob kết hợp với Firebase để A/B test và tối ưu tần suất quảng cáo xen kẽ và quảng cáo trả thưởng Rewarded Ads. Với việc tăng tần suất quảng cáo trả thưởng, họ đã tăng thời gian chơi của phiên chơi lên tới 28% và cùng lúc đó tăng doanh thu quảng cáo lên đến 18%. Công ty Gagex phản hồi rằng việc đo đếm sự ảnh hưởng của tần suất quảng cáo lên trải nghiệm người dùng đã luôn là khó khăn đối với họ kể từ khi họ bắt đầu kiếm tiền từ quảng cáo. Firebase đã giúp cho việc tối ưu dễ dàng hơn nhiều và họ sẽ triển khai cho nhiều tựa game khác. Tiếp sau đây, mình xin chia sẻ về việc chia nhỏ tập người dùng và áp dụng chiến thuật khác nhau cho các nhóm người dùng đó có thể giúp tăng doanh thu như thế nào. Thông thường, tập người dùng trong game khá khác nhau về tỷ lệ giữ lại, về thời gian chơi, về số phiên chơi. Họ cũng khác nhau về trình độ chơi, thích chơi game dễ hay khó, tương tác nhiều hay ít với bạn bè. Về doanh thu, họ cũng khác nhau về tương tác với quảng cáo hay mua vật phẩm trong game. Do sự khác biệt này, việc áp dụng cùng một cách chơi hay một kịch bản kiếm tiền cho tất cả người dùng thường không mang lại hiệu quả cao nhất. Với việc kết hợp AdMob và Firebase, bạn có thể dễ dàng chia nhỏ tập người dùng theo các tính chất trên. Quan trọng hơn, bạn có thể sử dụng remote config để tạo ra nội dung hay kịch bản kiếm tiền khác nhau cho từng tập người chơi đó. Như một ví dụ, mình xin chia sẻ trường hợp thành công của công ty Avid.ly với tựa game Defender Legend New Era. Họ đã kết hợp AdMob với Firebase và tạo ra tập người dùng chơi ít kinh nghiệm. Sau đó, họ sử dụng remote config để giảm độ khó của game cho nhóm người chơi này. Với cách làm này, họ đã tăng doanh thu trung bình trên mỗi người chơi, hay còn gọi tắt là ARPDAU, lên tới 20%, đồng thời tăng tỷ lệ giữ lại ở ngày thứ 30, D30 lên thêm 2%. Avid.ly chia sẻ, đây là một tựa game khá hay nhưng khá khó. Nhiều người chơi sẽ bắt đầu chơi, gặp bài khó và bỏ không chơi nữa, làm giảm tỷ lệ giữ lại. Với AdMob và Firebase, chúng tôi đã có thể hiểu tập người dùng và cải thiện trải nghiệm người dùng ở các trình độ khác nhau. Thật là tuyệt khi thấy cả ARPDAU và tỷ lệ giữ lại đều tăng. Tiếp theo đây, mình xin trình bày về cách tăng doanh thu bằng cách chia nhỏ tương tác với quảng cáo ra thành nhiều bước nhỏ hơn và tối ưu từng bước nhỏ đó. Khác với quảng cáo biểu ngữ và quảng cáo xen kẽ, đối với quảng cáo trả thưởng thì người chơi sẽ phải trải qua nhiều bước tương tác với quảng cáo này. Quá trình này bắt đầu khi nút bấm quảng cáo hiện trên màn hình, Add Prompt. Tiếp theo, người dùng ấn vào quảng cáo và video bắt đầu chạy, Add Impression. Rồi sau đó, người dùng xem hết quảng cáo và nhận thưởng, Add Reward. Và cuối cùng là khi người dùng sử dụng phần thưởng, Item Used. Thông thường, nhiều bên làm game chỉ hay tối ưu vị trí đặt quảng cáo trả thưởng mà không đi sâu vào cài đặt theo dõi và tối ưu các bước còn lại, nên có thể không mang đến hiệu quả tốt nhất. Với việc kết hợp AdMob và Firebase, bạn có thể dễ dàng cài đặt theo dõi sâu ở từng bước, từ đó tăng hiệu quả quảng cáo trả thưởng lên rất nhiều. Ví dụ ở đây, bạn có thể theo dõi và cải thiện một số chỉ số sau. Tỷ lệ hiển thị Visibility giúp đánh giá xem người dùng có dễ thấy nút quảng cáo trả thưởng không. Nếu chỉ số này không tốt, bạn có thể thử nghiệm thay đổi vị trí của nút hoặc làm cho nút to, rõ ràng hơn. Tỷ lệ chọn xem quảng cáo Opt-in Rate cho biết người dùng có muốn chọn xem hay không. Nếu chỉ số này không tốt, bạn có thể cải thiện bằng cách thay đổi giá trị của giải thưởng. Tỷ lệ sử dụng phần thưởng Consumption Rate cho biết người chơi sử dụng phần thưởng nhiều hay ít. Nếu chỉ số này không tốt, bạn có thể thay đổi lại cân bằng game. Với cách chia nhỏ và tối ưu từng bước như vậy, bạn có thể tăng doanh thu một cách hiệu quả cho quảng cáo trả thưởng. Sau đây, mình xin chia sẻ trường hợp thành công của game studio 433, một game studio ở Hàn Quốc với tựa game Boxing Star. 433 sử dụng Firebase để tạo ra các tập người dùng khác nhau. Quốc gia có ECPM thấp nhưng hiển thị cao và quốc gia có ECPM cao nhưng hiển thị ít. Sau đó, họ dùng Firebase để theo dõi tỷ lệ bỏ game của người dùng ở một số điểm nhất định. Đồng thời, họ cũng theo dõi tỷ lệ chọn xem quảng cáo Opt-in Rate, ECPM và số hiển thị tối ưu cho mỗi người dùng. Từ việc quan sát các chỉ số ở hai nhóm người chơi, họ tìm ra tần suất hiển thị mang lại hiệu quả tối ưu doanh thu. Việc sử dụng AdMob với Firebase đã giúp cho team 433 tạo ra những trải nghiệm quảng cáo khác nhau cho các tập người dùng khác nhau. Kết quả là khá ấn tượng, họ đã có thể tăng mức độ tương tác của người dùng lên tới 38% và tăng doanh thu lên 15%. Trong phần tiếp theo, mình xin trình bày về việc sử dụng Firebase Predictions để tối ưu doanh thu. Firebase Prediction sử dụng hệ thống máy học của Google trên dữ liệu game của bạn để dự đoán nhóm người chơi. Nhóm thứ nhất là sẽ bỏ game, với nhóm này bạn có thể tìm cách để giữ chân người dùng, ví dụ giảm độ khó hoặc tặng phần thưởng. Nhóm sẽ tiêu tiền trong game, với nhóm này bạn có thể tối ưu bằng cách thử nghiệm các giá trị vật phẩm có giá trị cao hơn hoặc không hiển thị quảng cáo cho nhóm này. Nhóm người dùng sẽ thực hiện một hành vi chuyển đổi khác do bạn định nghĩa, chẳng hạn như nhận phần quà hàng ngày hoặc sử dụng phần thưởng từ quảng cáo trả thưởng. Như một ví dụ, mình xin chia sẻ kinh nghiệm thành công của Pomelo Games với tựa game Once Upon a Tower. Ban đầu, CEO của công ty Pomelo Games, anh Jonas, không muốn sử dụng quảng cáo xen kẽ. Anh ấy lo sợ rằng người chơi sẽ xóa game nếu thấy quảng cáo xen kẽ. Tuy nhiên, anh ấy vẫn quyết định sử dụng Firebase để test thử giả thuyết đó. Pomelo Games sử dụng Firebase để thử nghiệm việc hiển thị quảng cáo xen kẽ interstitial và đo đếm ảnh hưởng đến doanh thu. Họ cũng sử dụng dự đoán Firebase Predictions để xác định tập người dùng sẽ không mua vật phẩm và chạy thử nghiệm AB để hiển thị quảng cáo cho nhóm người dùng đó. Sau khoảng 2 tuần thử nghiệm, họ thấy quảng cáo xen kẽ giúp tăng khoảng 25% doanh thu quảng cáo. Thật đáng ngạc nhiên, doanh thu IAP không giảm mà tăng tới 35%. Trong cả hai thử nghiệm hầu như không có ảnh hưởng đến tỷ lệ giữ lại. Thử nghiệm cũng cho thấy cả nhóm sẽ tiêu tiền và nhóm sẽ không tiêu tiền đều phản hồi tốt với quảng cáo xen kẽ. Do đó, Pomelo Games triển khai quảng cáo interstitial cho tất cả mọi người. Jonas tin rằng quảng cáo xen kẽ đã dẫn đến sự gia tăng mua hàng trong ứng dụng vì trò chơi sẽ loại bỏ quảng cáo khi người chơi mua hàng, do đó khuyến khích các giao dịch. Ví dụ này cho thấy việc sử dụng Firebase để thử nghiệm và phân tích hiệu quả kiếm tiền cho ra một kết quả khá là khác với cảm giác trực quan của chúng ta. Phần tiếp theo đây, mình xin chia sẻ một số tính năng tương đối mới của AdMob và Firebase giúp bạn dễ dàng đo đếm và tối ưu giá trị người dùng. Từ trước đến nay, việc đo đếm giá trị người dùng không thực sự dễ dàng, đặc biệt đối với các game studio vừa và nhỏ do một số khó khăn sau. Thứ nhất, user value là tổng hợp của phần quảng cáo và IAP. Thứ hai, cần cộng dồn giá trị trên qua thời gian cho mỗi người dùng để tính giá trị người dùng sau một số ngày nhất định. Thứ ba, thông thường cần sử dụng các bên phân tích app AAP hoặc tự xây dựng hệ thống phân tích để tính toán giá trị người dùng hay chia giá trị người dùng theo quốc gia, theo chiến dịch mua người dùng UA. Với việc liên kết AdMob và Firebase, bạn có thể dễ dàng theo dõi các thông tin trên trong báo cáo Cohort Report của AdMob. Báo cáo này cho phép bạn xem giá trị người dùng sau một số ngày nhất định, chia theo quốc gia và chiến dịch mua người dùng. Nó sẽ giúp bạn tạo những chiến dịch mua người dùng một cách hiệu quả, tìm kiếm các thị trường tiềm năng, tối ưu hóa doanh thu quảng cáo. Để xem báo cáo này, bạn chỉ cần liên kết AdMob với Firebase và sau đó bạn có thể xem nó trong phần báo cáo của AdMob. Ngoài ra, trong dịp này, mình cũng xin giới thiệu nhanh. Nếu các bạn chưa từng sử dụng tài khoản Google AdMob và bạn đang phát triển các ứng dụng hoặc game tiềm năng, thì bên mình có một đội ngũ hỗ trợ việc tạo tài khoản AdMob mới. Bạn có thể scan QR code dưới đây để nhận được tư vấn tạo tài khoản AdMob nhé. Đến đây, mình đã đi qua một số phương pháp và công cụ hữu ích có thể giúp các bạn thành công hơn về mặt tối ưu doanh thu cho game. Mình xin phép tóm lại một số điểm cần nhớ sau phần trình bày này. Đó là các bạn nên xây dựng và theo dõi phân tích, sử dụng hữu hiệu dữ liệu để tối ưu hóa doanh thu, luôn luôn cập nhật và đi sâu tối ưu doanh thu, nắm lấy những cơ hội của mảng game di động. Mình xin phép kết thúc phần trình bày của mình ở đây. Hy vọng đã có thể mang đến cho các bạn ít nhiều thông tin hữu ích. Chúc các bạn tìm được nhiều điều lý thú từ các phần khác của chương trình Think Games và chúc các bạn thành công.
Hello everyone, I hope you're keeping safe. On behalf of Tilting Point, I would like to first of all warmly thank Google for having us today at Singen, Vietnam. It's nice to be here today with you all and to have this opportunity to remotely present Tilting Point and our approach to live publishing, which I'm sure you'll find interesting. I really wish we could have met face to face in your beautiful country, but unfortunately COVID-19 is restricting everyone's movement for the time being. The Southeast Asia Pacific region and APAC at large is of great interest for Tilting Point, as we are growing our global presence, and the specificities of all those markets make the region very rich and diverse, but also challenging at the same time. We feel there is a lot of untapped potential for Tilting Point to help and support local talented developers trying to make a name in a very competitive international arena. My name is Sébastien Thévenet. I'm part of the BD team at Tilting Point, and I look after Southeast Asia Pacific markets, including India, from Sydney, Australia. But the aim of this presentation is very much to give you a first overview of Tilting Point progressive publishing model. I hope it will give you some interesting insights about how free-to-play gaming should be approached and tackled to be successful. So to set the scene right, let me introduce you first to our company, for those who are not familiar with. Tilting Point is a global free-to-play publisher with HQ in New York City. The company was created in 2012 and accounts now close to 200 employees. We are mobile first. We have also ventured into PC, Apple Arcade and console like Switch, but it starts first with mobile at Tilting Point. We are growing rapidly, both in terms of employees and offices around the world. We are in the USA with New York City, Boston and San Diego. We are in Europe with Barcelona, in Eastern Europe, in Kyiv and St. Petersburg. But we are also in Asia with a growing presence in Seoul, and myself based in the south part of the region in Sydney. Our teams are made of veterans from the gaming industry, from Ubisoft, Gameloft, King, Activision. So we do understand what it takes to make a great game, as we come from a developer background. At the end of the day, we understand your needs and your pain points. So talking about industry recognition, we've been recently awarded by Pocket Gamer, number 27 out of 50 top mobile makers, and are very proud about this achievement. Another highlight in 2020 was the release of SpongeBob Krusty Cook-Off to greater success, with top ranking on the main stores, on the Apple Store and Play Store. Finally, we've made also 3 acquisitions in 2020, with FTX Studio becoming part of our family, as well as Terra Genesis and Star Trek Timelines. These are our global and diverse presence. We have a diverse team of coming from 20 different countries, from all walks of life, and different gaming companies. Our games have been released in over 100 countries to date. Here we highlight our worldwide network of partners, from game developers, over 40 plus, licensors, you name them, from Sony Pictures to BBC to NASCAR to Nickelodeon, and publishing partners as well, and then distribution channel, which is growing for us. So what is Tilting Point approach to free-to-play publishing? First of all, we are in a very complex, competitive and highly sophisticated and technology-driven business. We've pioneered a new way of publishing mobile games based on data analysis versus a traditional publishing model, which is based on a bet a publisher will take on a developer, spending dollars on co-developing and marketing a game without knowing much about how the game will perform in the future. So this approach usually ends up with some misaligned interest and a huge gap of expectation between the developer and the publisher. Going against our differences than this traditional model, Tilting Point aims to reduce the risk for the developer, the publisher, and the investors by only looking at free-to-play games already launched in the market and scaling them to new heights. That's the idea. When the game has been identified, we look at scaling the game to grow its revenues via UA funding, campaign management, and other live publishing services. Then we team up with the developer to build a deeper partnership, leading to co-development in an ideal scenario. We do it progressively, step by step. We reduce the friction as much as possible. That's why we call it progressive publishing. There is no more guess. Decisions are made based on data and data only. That's why you as a developer should be obsessed with data. We say that we are mobile first, as it is still the place where we can really scale very successfully, and we have the ability to do so, which is harder to make it and to do it on PC, for instance. So it won't be from 0 to hero, but more from bringing your games from X to Y, and Y could be 3X or 5X or even more. So how do we do it? How we take what we have, how we take this game already live in the market and make it bigger. How to take a game from the top 1,000 grossing in revenues and making it down to 500 or top 100 grossing. And as you may be aware, from top 200 to 2,000 grossing represents $1 billion business, very worth to be considered. So we aim to unlock your full game potential and change your life. We have a unique model, the way we do it and the way we address the market. So we go through phases. Phase 1 would be the game onboarding. Phase 2 would be the live game publishing. And the third phase is the co-development. So let me go phase by phase and give you more insights. So since we're interested in forming a long-term partnership, we take our initial game evaluation process very seriously. We are looking for high-performing and talented teams with games that are already starting to find traction in the market and will uniquely benefit from what the team at Tilting Point has to offer. So it all starts with initiating this relationship with the developers, getting to know each other and understand their needs, or your needs. As mentioned before, our approach is data-driven. We have a proprietary algorithm that helps us identify games already live in the market and which could potentially scale. We'll bring your game into our data evaluation funnel. We're going to either UA test it, and we'll UA test it if no previous campaigns have been made before, or we go with data evaluation if there have been campaigns made in the past. We'll ask you to share your data. We'll ask you to get access to iTunes Connect, Google Play Console and Facebook access. So we'll test your game and report back on the scalability potential. We are honest and very transparent with the results. We provide to you as well as we only invest in games that have the right path to success according to a set of metrics. We look into retention, we look into LTV curve, we look into ROAS, return on ad spend, we look into CPI. We'll also benchmark your game against what's available in the market and provide recommendations for improvement, if need be, namely on the creative side. If the test is negative, we can run another test a few months down the track after providing you with have implemented our recommendation. Lots of games which enter our funnel every month. We are taking hundreds of games per month, where we test and evaluate them, and we only sign a couple of them per month. So as you can see, we are very selective in our approach as we want to make sure that we are picking the right candidates for success. This process will provide us with lots of data insight about the market and the ecosystem. Keep in mind that our bottom line will always be whether your game can scale or not. So once phase 1 is over and providing the UAT or data evaluation bring back positive results, we start discussing with the developer about his needs and how we can help with our live publishing offering. So our live publishing of services is made of 3 growth pillars: the paid growth, the organic growth, and the monetization growth. So we do not offer one fit-for-all solution. That's why understanding your needs is of paramount, but it always starts with UA funding and or UA campaign management. We are here to listen to you, cater to your needs, support and assist. At the end of the day, you are the star and we are here to make you even more successful. So let's deep dive briefly on each of those 3 main pillars, but before that, allow me to mention the importance of our creative services, which overarch our live publishing services. So you all know the importance of creative assets when running a UA campaign. Everyone can do creative UA assets, but it's another thing to be able to provide top-notch and impactful creatives. That's why we've invested into a strong team of creative experts, 30 people, based in Barcelona, in Spain. They deal on a daily basis with videos and creative assets using our proprietary creative tools called CAT, Creative Automation Technology, automizing the creative process and allowing us to create a huge amount of creatives. The more diversity, the better, and we can provide 10 different ads per week for one game, for instance. whether it's statics, whether it's video or playable ad formats that we have available. As a piece of advice, try to keep your creative enticing, smart and fresh at all times to distinguish you from the competition and to have the best return on investment. Starting with the paid growth pillar. So we can help with capital or do much more, offering other live publishing services like UA management, for instance. Talking about funding, we've secured 3 years ago a large fund with a financial institution, $132 million per year, allowing us to fund large UA campaigns. We have the ability to give flexibility to the deal financially, but we prefer to work on a revenue sharing basis, which is actually more a profit sharing. As UA is critical within our offering, 3 years ago we've built an internal tech called Dora. Dora automates and optimizes our UA process, allowing us to manage more games at the same time. Now onto the organic growth. We offer asset store optimization, featuring, so we have fantastic relationship with Apple and Google at HQ level in the US, allowing us to get regular featuring. Platform partnership is also part of the organic growth, IP, brand integration, Think SpongeBob or Krusty Cook-Off, or more recently Stargate IP integration within Astro Kings, a time limited event, for instance. So all those services are available and fully integrated within our live publishing offering. Of course, not everything will be done day one of the partnership, but we will build along the way together according to your needs. Monetization growth is a third pillar of our live publishing offering. Here we talk about ad monetization, CRM and pricing strategy, and in a nutshell, how we can help you to increase your ad revenues, trying out new ad networks, maximizing the gamer experience when it comes to offering rewards to specific VIP players, pushing events or pricing to specific markets, with the bottom line to optimize the LTV of your game. We can also provide merchandising to VIP players whenever it makes sense. So about the LTV more specifically, we've acquired a smart technology called Gondola a couple of years ago. Gondola optimizes LTV and enables to show different offers or packages, ads or different prices. Everything is all about optimizing and customizing the customer journey to increase retention and repeat purchase in a friendly and non-intrusive way. Finally, in an ever-changing world, we all heard about IDFA and how IDFA will impact the industry. We, as a company and a global publisher, are preparing ourselves for the change and take privacy and compliance matters very seriously. In that respect, we are able to support and advise accordingly our partners to make sure they understand the consequences of such changes in the gaming ecosystem. Now, onto our co-development phase, number 3. So once we have built a relationship by having a partnership in place, live publishing services are running, everyone is happy, and once we know each other better, we can investigate potential opportunities for co-development. So co-development could be related to the games that we are currently funding or you are managing or we've worked together on, or related to another game from your portfolio. The discussion is open. We can bring the power of IP to your game thanks to our relationship with major brands. If it's relevant to integrate an IP within your game, we will further discuss with you how we can make it happen. So see, for instance, here are some examples of famous IPs that we've been implementing into some of our games: SpongeBob, Doctor Who, NASCAR, Stargate, just to name a few. The licensed co-development model is all about balancing the tripartite relationship between Tilting Point, the IP owner, and you, the developer. We'll perfectly match your proven engine with a world-class IP and make sure we deliver results backed up by the most relevant publishing strategy. So now let me jump onto some case studies to give you a bit of flavor of our recent performance. First, this is a recent compelling example of UA funding, namely with a large Korean studio called Joy City. We are organizing massive UA campaigns up to $40 million USD a year to raise and bring that game called Gunship Battle to the West. As a result, we witnessed double revenue growth since we started the campaigns with Joy City. This is a great example of a large studio looking for expertise to bring its game from east to west. Here is another example of Tilting Point venturing into the hyper-casual gaming space with Loop Games, a studio in Turkey. We've been helping this game to greater success, and the game was very much under the radar, so we've made it very successful to date. Here's another great example which is close to our heart at Tilting Point. It's called Genesis, and it's from Edgework Entertainment. This case is a perfect demonstration of the whole story of Tilting Point, and let me tell you more about it. So the game was originally identified by our internal algorithm, and we decided to reach out the developer. A one-man studio making 20k revenues per month, only on iOS at that time. He was even not on Google and never worked with a publisher before. So the game was quite unique, and I invite you to try it and download it. The game was teaching and simulating terraforming, bringing life to inhabitable planets. Think, for instance, turning Mars into a colony. So the game was very niche. Lots of the game was text-based. Its monetization was not the best. No one would have bet, honestly, on it, but we partnered with the developer and scaled his game tremendously. The game scaled 10x, making up to 700k USD per month, and crossed the 10 million mark to date. From a one-man studio, it's now a 7-people studio, and Tilting Point bought the game last year from the studio in 2020. So again, a very interesting case study here. As a piece of advice in this very competitive market, if you find something unique which works with your audience, you can scale it. Don't work in the same place everyone does, like middle-aged fantasy, for instance. You know, genre, it's going to be hard. It's going to be CPL will be high and competitive will be tough. Try to be very different in terms of audience, art style, and theme, without reinventing the wheel. Here's now a Codev case study which you may have heard about it. It's Food Truck Chef, which was originally developed by Nukebox Studio in India. We started our partnership with them with UF funding and management, and increased their revenues 3x with a great 90 days payback period. The results were great, but we thought that we could do way more with Food Truck Chef, so we decided to add the SpongeBob IP and work on co-developing a new title called SpongeBob Crystal Cook-Off. Here are the results before and after the IP was added to the co-developed game. Amazing success with the game, reaching top of the charts last year at launch and keeping on performing very well today. So to conclude with my presentation, here are some tips for you to consider when looking for a publisher to help you bring your title from east to west. First of all, I would say the publisher you'll partner with needs to have a global footprint. Ideally established in the West, it will give you great insights and intel about those target markets. What is the CPI? What are the player stays? What works and does not work? Whether your game will be a good fit in the West or not, and if there is anything that needs to be twisted in the game to make it work into the West. Ask your potential partner to provide track records of their UA campaigns in the West, how they perform and why. Ask questions and expect clear answers. Choosing a publisher that has a team of experts who dealt with free-to-play development, who understand what it takes to develop a great game and market it. Of course, the publisher needs to have the ability to localize its campaign wherever it makes sense, and also have the funds to market its efforts while keeping a clear vision on data, ad spend and LTV. The relationship with the main stores is critical as well, not only at local level, but also at HQ levels. So make sure this relationship is sound and will translate into regular featuring. Finally, look at a publisher who understands your needs, but also who is looking at a long-term partnership. You know, someone who will invest into your passion, into your talented team, and believe in your potential as a studio. So I hope you will find those few tips useful. By now you should have a better understanding of Tilting Point progressive publishing offering and how we can help you to scale your game to new heights. I'm happy to answer any of your questions and meet you next time I'm in Vietnam. My email is below for reference. Thank you again and enjoy Sing Game Vietnam.
Tôi hy vọng những chia sẻ vừa rồi đã giúp bạn tạo ra được những chiến lược riêng để mở rộng quy mô kinh doanh, cả về mặt tối ưu doanh thu và tìm kiếm người dùng. tôi cũng đúc kết ra được một bài học lớn. Đó chính là trong bối cảnh thị trường ngày càng có nhiều sự cạnh tranh, đa dạng hóa chính là chìa khóa để thúc đẩy tăng trưởng. Đa dạng hóa về thị trường, về nguồn doanh thu và cả về định hướng sản phẩm sẽ giúp bạn đạt được nhiều thành công hơn. Và tất nhiên là để đa dạng hóa được doanh nghiệp, chúng ta cũng cần có những nguồn lực về kinh tế, cũng như những cách thức giữ người dùng ở lại trò chơi để ổn định nguồn doanh thu. Chính vì vậy, chúng tôi đã mời tới đây hai diễn giả, Felicia từ Play Ventures và Christian từ Game Jam để chia sẻ sâu hơn về những vấn đề này. Nhưng trước khi chúng ta bắt đầu, đừng quên tham gia mini games và gửi đáp án của bạn thông qua đường link QR code. Mỗi khung chữ bạn nhìn thấy trong màn hình biểu hiện cho một con số bí mật.
Thank you everybody for joining me today. My name is Felicia and I work with Play Ventures, and today I will be sharing how you can choose the right investors and secure funding for your gaming company. Before I begin, just a brief introduction of myself. My original background was actually not in gaming. It's actually in growth and PR, and I've worked in a few startups, including a healthcare tech startup as well as a voice tech startup, and also at larger organizations like the Singapore Economic Development Board. Today I work with Play Ventures. We're an early stage gaming VC fund. We're based in Singapore and Helsinki, but we invest globally in gaming startups like gaming startups in Vietnam, such as Game Jam, to bigger games in Turkey, to MPL in India. Before we go any further, I want to make sure that we have a foundational base of the pros and cons of external funding. So in terms of external funding, you have VC and you also have angel funding. They're both external, but they work slightly differently. So VCs typically have a larger amount of capital to deploy, and they also have teams to help with connections, to help with growth, to help with scaling. They're also more likely to be able to write checks across multiple rounds, so not just the first round. Angels themselves, they could also write bigger checks when they work as a collective, and there are a few gaming angel collectives that are investing actively. Angels can also be easier to deal with in terms of due diligence, and depending on their background, especially if they were operational themselves, so they've worked in gaming startups or they were previously game entrepreneurs themselves, they can also help you by providing relevant expertise. To understand who VCs are and what they're concerned with, you basically have to follow the money. So if you want to know what VCs do every day, what do they look for, what are their concerns, just follow the money. Basically, VCs are just people who have operational experience from working or starting their own startup. Or they can come from an investment background, so a finance background. But if you think VCs are very intimidating or unrelatable, an easy way to think about it is that ultimately VCs also have bosses. And these bosses are actually their investors, because the money has to come from somewhere. These investors invest into the VC fund. And the idea is that the VC fund will help them to invest their capital into promising startups, so promising startups like yours. In exchange, because no money is free money, the VC will hope to own a percentage of your company. So they don't like to fund individual projects, but what they do is equity financing, which means they own, say, 20%, 15%, or 10% of your startup, which they hope is going to be worth a lot more in the future than it is now. And this is important because VCs don't just need to give our investors their money back, we need to actually give them a multiple of their money, so at least 3 times their money at the end of the 10 years. This brings us to the next question: how can VCs actually get their investors' money back? So VCs actually get their returns from what we call exits. So there's 2 most common types of exits. The first ones are acquisitions, so really exciting acquisitions like Zynga acquiring Peak Games for 1.8 billion. That will make your VC investor very, very happy. The second one is basically IPO. So for example, Unity recently IPO'd. that also basically makes VCs very, very happy. So far, very straightforward. VCs invest money into companies in exchange for a percentage. They get their returns from what we call exits, because there's this thing called the power law. And the power law, in essence, basically says that most of the profits are going to come from fewer than 10 companies. So that's a lot of low performers or non-performers as far as the VC is concerned. So basically, they're looking for what we call star performers or fund returners that's going to make up for all the other low performers. And these VCs need this fund returner to basically be at least 100x return. So for example, if a fund is about a $40 million fund, then in order to return the fund 3 times, it's 40 times 3, the value of the VC's ownership in that company needs to be 120 million. So that's just their ownership. So if they just own 20% of the company, then the company itself needs to have a $600 million exit, even though the VC might only put in 1 million initially. So those are the economics of how VCs operate and what they're looking for. With the economics now out of the way, the question is, should you even raise VC funding? It's not suitable for everybody, and that's okay. But like I said, there's no money that's free entirely, so it's good to know what you're getting yourself into. You should raise VC funding if, like we said, you have the ambition to build at least 100 million plus company, likely even more, because VCs, as we said, they're looking for the star performers, they're looking for fund returners. That means you need to have the drive, the vision, the execution to be number one, the category leader. It means that you have to probably have a great team around you and the ability to hire top talent. Also, you don't just need to have a tolerance for risk uncertainty, but you need to have very high tolerance for risk and uncertainty, and you have to be able to put up with that for many, many years of your life. It doesn't, Rome was not built in a day, neither is your amazing startup going to be built in one day. So ultimately, these things are things that you should think about before you even start pitching to VCs. And it's also things that you should discuss with your co-founders. Make sure that everyone is aligned. If your co-founders are married or they have girlfriends or boyfriends, make sure they also discuss this with their partners and their families, because ultimately it's a very long journey. It's a very difficult journey. And we've seen what happens when co-founders don't have a supportive network around them, supportive family around them. It makes the journey a lot more difficult, especially when things start to go bad, or maybe your first game doesn't work out, which will ultimately, it will happen at some point. And then, make sure you align on your pitch and be ready to answer some tough questions. It's okay, as I said, if you don't want to raise VC funding, and you absolutely should not if you're raising it just because everyone is doing it. It's not a great reason. If you just want bragging rights, if you want to have a high salary, this is actually a pretty big red flag if VC is looking at investing and see that you plan to pay yourself a super luxurious salary. The reason is because the investment is meant for you to grow the company. So by all means, do pay yourself. Make sure you pay yourself a salary, a decent salary, so that you're not worried about making rent or struggling to just meet your basic needs. But an excessive one is a wrong signal, because your aim is to really make the company worth so much more, so that in future you could make a luxurious life for yourself, not to enjoy a luxurious salary that should probably be used to finance other hires or paying your office rent, for example, if you're still renting an office in COVID. You shouldn't raise VC funding if you just want to finance a project. Like I said, VCs look for equity funding, so they're investing into your company. You shouldn't look at it to complete a prototype. Again, VCs are looking for business. And remember that if you cannot deal with selling control of your company, then maybe you might not want to raise VC funding. Once you do, you're going to be involved with one another for a very long time. So if in future you decide that you don't want that VC to be an owner of your company or part owner of your company, then restructuring your cap table and changing that ownership in the future is just going to be extra headache, and it can be challenging. If after all of this you still decide VC funding is the way you want to go, then here are some do's and don'ts. So do research, tailor, and prioritize your pitch. I think it's surprising how much this doesn't happen. And when you prioritize, you can think about things like, is this person you're talking to a gaming VC like Play Ventures, or are they a generalist VC? And if it's a generalist VC, then you might need to do a little bit more of an introduction on the gaming industry, why it's interesting, share a little bit more background info on that. If you're talking to a gaming VC, then you probably don't really need to do that as much. Also consider, are they late or early stage, and do they fit, where you are in your company's journey? If they are early stage VCs, think about whether, do they only invest at Series A after you've had some traction, or will they invest if you just have a team and an idea and basically a pitch deck? Do they invest in your geography? Some VCs are specifically geographically focused, so they will only invest in, for example, Europe or North America. Some majority do investments in a particular geography, but based on their past investments, will sometimes venture out into other territories. So that's something that you also want to look out for and prioritize accordingly. You also want to look out for whether they normally lead or do they just follow. Normally you want to try and prioritize securing your lead investor first and then filling up the round with other follow-on investors. And also you should think about showing traction even at the early stage, and this could mean metrics if you have them to share. Day 1, day 3 retention, for example. Make sure you understand them, make sure you understand the difference between rolling retention and classic retention, for example. Or if you don't have a product and metrics to share, then also think about how else can you demonstrate traction. Perhaps a prototype that you've built on weekends or after work or on your own time. Basically, we would take this as a good signal about how passionate you are, how determined you are, and how resourceful you are in pursuing this entrepreneurship journey for yourself. Also, something that's often neglected is sending your pitch deck ahead of time. I recommend doing this because it allows the VC to hopefully review it before you have the conversation, and for you to have a chat that's not just about reading off the slides and pitching, from the pitch deck. It allows you to have deeper conversation. It allows you to also ask questions to check founder VC fit. This is not just the opportunity for the VC to assess if your company makes sense for them as an investment opportunity. It's also for you to assess if this could be somebody that you want to work with for the next few years, right? So try to see if you can identify smart money, and some of the questions that you might want to ask if you haven't already found the answers through desktop research is, how do they normally work with their companies? And you might want to take notes here and reference check this later with companies that they have invested in and they have worked in with. You can also check if they lead or follow. Under what circumstances would they co-lead, for example? Under what circumstances would they follow? Ask them also how they think about allocations for follow-on financing. Ask them, or research where they are in their fund lifetime and what their investment decision-making journey is like. It's going to be slightly different for every fund. Using Play Ventures as an example, you can actually find lots of answers from our websites. This is just from the home page, so you can see that we invest early. We're looking specifically for free-to-play game studios and game services. We invest globally. And then also we're looking for people to build at least $100 million plus opportunity. Some next interesting keywords as well that you can see on our news page. If you look at the news page, for example, you'll see a lot of keywords. You'll see we have 135 million fund 2. You see that we would co-invest. We've invested into territories like India. You can see that we invest into pre-series A and C stage. And you can also see something interesting there, which is further participation from an existing backer, Play Ventures. So this is important because it implies that not only do we invest in the first round, we also invest in follow-on rounds. Moving on to what you shouldn't do. So the top one is to please don't ask to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And the reason is very, very practical. VCs look at many deals and some of them are going to be similar to yours. So signing an NDA creates unnecessary legal liability for us. But if you want to know more details, I recommend checking out Brett Fell's article for more information. He writes about it in a really clear and concise way. The next thing is, don't try to lie or hide or cherry pick metrics, especially after you've been asked specifically. The next one is not having a technical founder can be a pretty big red flag. And the reason, again, is practical. If you have a technical founder, it means products can continue to be developed and progress, even if you don't have a whole team of engineers. But if you don't have that technical founder, or at least somebody who can code hands-on, it's going to be probably a bit difficult to have that same amount of progress. Don't break your cap table. So founders at the early stage should have majority equity. Rule of thumb, at the pre-seed stage, if this is your first round of raising external funding, then you should have about 90 to even 100% of your ownership as the founding team. If it's at the seed stage, then about 80%. If you are at a seed round, for example, and you only own 50% of your company as founders, then that's a bit of a flag for VCs, because there's a question of, do you have enough ownership to keep motivating yourself, especially as you raise more money, you get diluted more and more, things start to go wrong, and maybe your first game doesn't ship so well, all these questions. So try to be careful about ownership and your cap table. And in that same vein, if you have advisors, they can definitely value add. We recommend that a ballpark figure is about 1 to 2% equity, and we also recommend that you should sign an advisory agreement. An advisory agreement basically would just kind of put in black and white, what is this advisory shares for, like a certain amount of hourly commitment, across a certain time period, or certain kind of obligations that they're going to be helping you with. And then also, something that you might want to be careful about is strategic ownership. Especially at the early stage, it can be a double-edged sword. And finally, just be a nice person. Being rude, emotional, or entitled, those kind of things can break deals, and they have, for example, in our circumstances, changed minds about whether we've invested into a company. Ultimately, if you have similar deals that are just as compelling, then oftentimes, something that VC is going to consider is who would you rather work with, right? If they're all things considered exactly the same and similar upsides, similar strong team, similar great opportunity, then, do you like the person? Finally, some last things to reconsider that we often see: solo founder setups. Again, it's a practical consideration. Being a founder is very tough, it's very lonely. And no single founder is going to be excellent at everything. When you have a team, it's more likely that you guys would have your various strengths and various skill sets. You complement each other, and you can bounce ideas off each other and sanity check each other. It's going to be a lot easier, a lot better, and a lot less lonely. The other thing that we recommend reconsidering is using middlemen. Really, at this early stage, CEO should be the one who lead and pitch. So if you can't do it at the early stage, there's questions about how you'll be able to pitch to future investors. How would you be able to pitch to top talents to join you? How do you convince them? And the second reason is ultimately middlemen take a cut. And normally it's a percentage of, say, how much funds you've raised. This is not ideal when a VC invests in your company. Obviously, they want as much of the funds to go towards funding the company and developing the company. It's not ideal that they take a cut out of however much you've raised. And finally, if you're raising, and sometimes people try to use FOMO to encourage and speed along the process, which is fine, but you probably want to be realistic and careful about how you use it. If you say that this is the first conversation you've had with a VC and you're trying to pressure them into issuing a term sheet tomorrow because you already have one on the table and you're going to sign tomorrow, then that's probably not very likely. And also remember that VCs do talk to one another. So if you're kind of telling a little white lie, that's something that's very easily found out. Thank you for joining me today. Please connect with me over on email or LinkedIn. I'd be happy to chat with you, and have an amazing day.
Hey everyone, my name is Christian Calderon, and I'm here today to talk to you about how to develop your games to retain users. So a little bit about me. I've been an executive at a few different gaming startups like KixEye, Dots, and Ketchup, all of it have which been acquired. And I recently moved to Vietnam to start a company called Game Jam. We were based in Ho Chi Minh City, and actually this year we opened a new office in Hanoi. And also this year we've achieved more than 200 million downloads. So we're a fairly new studio. that has been growing fast in Vietnam. And to start the presentation off, talk about how to better develop games that retain better. It's really important to discuss break down retention. So what is retention? Where does it come from? How do we define it? So to go from the very, very basic stuff. So retention essentially is a form. We measure it as a form of engagement, and is really based on a player's progression in a game. And so what is player progression? So progression is essentially the engagement between player and game over a period of time, or the player is moving towards an advanced state in the game. So they're playing the game, they're improving, they're getting better, and they're coming back to keep playing. And different games and different players will have different progression paths, and different combinations of players and games will have different progression paths. And oftentimes, if you're not collecting this data, if you're visualizing this, you may think that your progression curve is kind of all over the place, but it doesn't have to be that way, because you can easily track engagement in the player progression. And that's because every time a player interacts with the game or engages with the game, you can track that as an event. And this kind of basic event tracking can then be used to visualize and layer on different visualizations or analysis of engagement, such as retention, time spent in the game, player progression, all these kinds of funnel analysis, all these kinds of things. And the most important, and probably the most widely used across different organizations within a gaming business, is retention. And explain why in a second. But so here we're looking at daily cohorted retention, and essentially we're looking at a cohort of users that installs the game or comes into the game on a certain day, and then we follow that cohort of users over time, day after day, and we track how many come back the next day. And this is what we call a daily cohorted retention. And this is extremely important because obviously it can be used by different organizations, and the reason why is because it's the fundamental link between cumulative ARPDAU and LTV. And so basically what we're looking at in the LTV equation, you're looking at the summation of the area under the retention curve over a period of time, and then you're also looking at ARPDAU for that same period of time. And then you multiply those two together, and then you get the lifetime value over that same period of time. Retention is a fundamental component in the LTV equation, and that is why a lot of different teams within a gaming business can look at lifetime value. And so if we think about how lifetime value changes with retention, so you simply can just hold ARPDAU constant, and then you improve your retention by, like, let's say 10%. And then you'll see that your lifetime value will increase proportionately, not exactly 10%, a little bit less, but it'll increase almost proportionately by the same amount. And you increase it again, and the same thing happens. Obviously, when those of us that have worked on games know that ARPDAU never is really constant, and that it's always changing, especially with product changes. So it's important to take into consideration the changes that ARPDAU could have when you're trying to impose a change on retention. So if you're trying to build a feature aimed towards increasing retention, always take into consideration, what kind of impact you could potentially see with ARPDAU. It's really important. And then before we jump into some of the examples, it's important to note that you need some kind of process for measuring changes to your game for this to work, and some way to evaluate and measure changes that you're making and the impact on your game's KPIs, or if it's in fact improving retention. And there's different ways you can do this. The easiest and most simple way is to really pare down builds that you're submitting, so that when you're submitting a new build, that you only have maybe one feature in there that you're trying to change. And this is what we do at Game Jam. There's obviously different ways to and different types of more complex analysis that you could run if you have multiple features running in at the same time, but it's a little more complex and harder to measure. So the easiest thing to do is to, for example, put in one feature, for example, like in this case, we're saying a daily reward calendar, and make an assumption about how much we think it could improve retention. In this case, we're saying 10% day 1, improved by day 7 by 5%, and then put it in and measure and see if that in fact happened. Now, if I had 10 other features in the same build, it'll be a little more harder to know if this particular feature accomplished those goals that I wanted. So that's what we say, easier, better for especially small studios. Pare down your builds, submit the update, check, and then you can obviously ship again another feature later. So let's just jump into now how to improve retention. So I wanted to talk about this very broadly because every single organization within a gaming company can help improve retention. It's not just the game development, it's also the product team and also the marketing team. And so I'll talk about different examples that basically all of these functions can help improve retention in different ways. And the first and the most obvious is the game development, or the game itself. This is probably, it is the most important, especially in the beginning. All you have really is your game, right? And so thinking about your core loop, your core game is the most important thing for determining and establishing your baseline retention. And then after you've developed your core game, you start to work on metagame, and you start to work on different things that can help improve retention further. But it's really, really important to think about core gameplay. The next thing is, besides metagame, are different tools and features that you can build to like funnel analysis, to improve your level design and game design over time, especially as you're adding more content to your game. But the first thing we really think is the most important. And so at Game Jam, we look at the core gameplay, and this can be applied to any type of game genre. It doesn't have to be hyper casual. I learned this from a very famous and popular game developer who made RTS games. And basically, what I learned was that you want to think about your core loop, is the core gameplay of what you're doing as the core component of the game. For hyper casual, we think about it as the first 30 seconds of gameplay, right? What are the core gestures? What are the core things that you're doing? And then outside of that, we start thinking about, for hyper casual, it's very quick. So we start thinking about metagame, every 1 minute to 2 minutes to a couple of hours to days. If you have a RPG game or RTS game, you may be looking into days, weeks, or even months into metagame loops and metagame elements. But for all games, this game design principle can be applied, and that is thinking about your core gameplay, establishing baseline retention, and measuring it. For us, it's really important because we want to make sure we've established a very good, strong core baseline retention before we start working on other aspects of the game. If we go and work on a game for 6 months and we find that the core, the retention is very low compared to what we thought, it's a little harder to distinguish, okay, why is it low? Is it because of the core game? Is it because of the metagame? Are the product features not communicated well? So it's really, really good to establish this and measure it as soon and fast as possible to see what your kind of baseline retention is for your core mechanic. The next thing, which is still important, but it's not going to 2 or 3x your retention, is funnel analysis. So especially for level-based games, puzzle games, brain games, funnel analysis is really, really important. Looking at the drop rates and completion rates for the levels, how far users are progressing through the game. And extremely, extremely useful for game designers and level designers to make more content. So they can make a level, go back to your funnel analysis, look at the drop rates and say, oh, okay, this is performed well or not as well, so I'm going to make some changes here. So funnel analysis is extremely important for game development. The next thing I want to talk about is product. So product UX is king, and the reason why is because you could build the greatest product features in the world, but if they're not communicated well or messaged well in the game, players will not understand them or will not maybe understand the feature that you're building. So even with the best features you could possibly build, if it has bad UI UX, you won't get the desired outcome that you're looking for and improve, especially if you're trying to improve retention in your game. So and maybe we'll take a step back and think about what is product. So product is essentially the productization of everything around gameplay, right? So you have your game design, your gameplay, your metagame, and then everything you productize around that, features, daily reward calendars, event systems, these kinds of things we kind of consider as product. So a lot of things a product team can do to improve, a lot of features can be built to improve retention. And the most important thing besides UX to keep in mind about product is just you always have to remember your goal of improving the engagement between player and game. And so we can talk a little bit about some examples here. The first one is from one of the first mobile games, the first mobile game I've ever worked on, called 2 Dots, which was a really fun game. It was #1 in over 100 countries. Still a top puzzle game today in the United States, and really simple but and beautiful but elegant UI UX. And so here you can see, like, we have positive reinforcement on messaging, telling the player, oh, it's just a minor setback, you know, you can come back, it's okay. And actually that got picked up in the news in New York, and as, you know, kind of a really thoughtful way to approach our players. The probably most important contributor to retention on the screen here is the life system. And so life systems can really help improve retention, especially for puzzle games or level-based games. And for us, it was really important because when we first launched the game, we only had 60 levels. And so players were getting through the content very, very fast. And so when we introduced the level life system, with the life system, we were able to kind of gate the progression and get players to come back the next day for more levels. So the life system was really helpful for that. Another side note on this, if you have a game with 60 levels and you have another game with thousands and thousands of levels, you don't want to apply the same logic on your life system, right? So you want to think about your life system is probably going to change over time with your game as you add more content to your game. And it's always good to test this and check it. Last thing at the bottom is this big, beautiful red button. And I love this because it's super simple, beautiful red call to action color, and just one big button that you press to go on to the next screen. Things like this help reduce drop and improve player progression through different scenes in your game. The next kind of product thing to talk about is this is a game that I love. It's called CSR2 Racing. It's a racing game, and this is a screenshot. This is a screenshot from YouTube of someone playing an event system in the game, and you can see he says he lost all his money. So they probably do a good job on monetization. But he's playing a limited time event, a limited time race where he can win a limited edition Ferrari. How cool is that, right? So he's trying to beat this. He's got 7 days left, and he's trying to beat this limited time event. And obviously there's a gas mechanic here, so you can't do it all in one go. So this kind of product feature not only improves retention because you keep them coming back, right? But also it's improving monetization. And so again, important to think about ARPDAU in addition to retention when building features. This is a perfect example why. The last kind of topic I want to discuss is marketing. Marketing is extremely important. There's different ways marketing department can improve retention. We'll go over a couple. The first is the quality of traffic inside of your game. So if you're monetizing your game with ads, usually the monetization's within marketing. If you're monetizing your game with ads, you want to look at the ad quality inside of your game. And also with user acquisition, so if you're spending money to advertise, you want to look at the traffic quality of your game. This could greatly change based on quality or ad format. I've seen some games have really strong retention in some sources and not so much in others. The most popular one here is probably lifecycle marketing. So things like re-engagement campaigns, email campaigns, push notifications, these kinds of things. Very popular, especially for high lifetime value games or games with that have games as a service or this kind of thing. Lifecycle marketing, really important for that. It can help re-engage and bring players back to your game. And the last thing, probably not talked about as much, is a brand. So Whether you're building a brand or using someone else's brand, it can, licensing another brand, it can be used to improve retention because, these brands have audiences with high affinity towards that brand. So if you put that brand in a game, and you're improving the engagement between player and game, right? Because these players have a high affinity towards the brand. So brands can be used to improve retention and monetization. The first screenshot here that I'm showing you is a screenshot from our ad quality dashboard. So at Game Jam, we built our own ad quality system where it looks at all the ads that we're serving in our game and in all of our games. And then we can rank them by CTR, we can rank them by churn, and we can see out of all the ads that we're serving, which ones are causing the most churn in our games or have the highest click-through rate. And then we can even go in and click on the ad, see what the ad looks like, see if it's malicious or sending users directly to the store, which is kind of popular now, which is not good, right? But sometimes it's happening. And also look at, and if we find something wrong, then we can flag that ad and send it to the ad network to block. So ad quality is becoming an increasing problem, especially with iOS 14.5. So we built this dashboard to solve this problem, and we highly recommend other publishers and developers to look into ad quality because it's the biggest contributor to retention drop. A lot of people think it's ad frequency, which is not true. It's actually ad quality. It's the quality of the ads that reduce retention on the monetization side. The last and final thing that I want to talk about, which is extremely important, is traffic quality. So with all of our dashboards, we have a filter that allows us to filter out different ad sources. And this is really important because again, for some traffic sources, you could have like 60% day one retention, and another you could have 5% day one retention for the same exact game. So it's really, really important in almost all of your engagement dashboards, and to have a filter to filter by different traffic sources. So that you can keep an eye on this, because maybe you see your retention has dropped 20%, but you've made no product changes, and you're like, what's going on? And it could simply just mean that you ramped up traffic on one source because it was cheaper, but then you're finding also that has lower retention. So really important to keep an eye on traffic, the traffic quality, adding some kind of filter for traffic source and user acquisition. And that's all for my presentation. I just want to thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you so much again, and have a wonderful day.
Vậy là chúng ta cũng đã đi cùng với nhau một chặng đường khá dài, xuyên suốt 3 ngày của sự kiện Think Games. Thay mặt cho những người làm chương trình, tôi xin được gửi tới các diễn giả lời tri ân sâu sắc nhất. Cảm ơn các diễn giả đã mang tới những nội dung chia sẻ quý báu cho cộng đồng những nhà phát triển game tại Việt Nam. Nếu bạn đã bỏ lỡ một phần của sự kiện hoặc muốn chia sẻ thêm cho các đồng nghiệp cùng xem, thì toàn bộ nội dung sẽ được phát lại trên trang web của sự kiện. Bạn chỉ cần đăng ký hoặc đăng nhập lại để xem nhé. Sự kiện Think Games Việt Nam đã chính thức khép lại, nhưng cũng là khởi đầu cho chuỗi sự kiện mà Google sẽ tiếp tục gửi đến các nhà phát triển game tại Việt Nam. Đánh giá và góp ý của các bạn sẽ giúp cho chúng tôi tạo ra được những nội dung có giá trị thực tiễn nhất tới cộng đồng. Chính vì vậy, hãy cho chúng tôi biết suy nghĩ của các bạn qua phiếu phản hồi được gửi tới sau sự kiện. Một lần nữa, Google rất cảm ơn sự đồng hành của tất cả các bạn. Chúng tôi rất hy vọng chúng ta sẽ cùng chung tay để tạo thêm giá trị, giúp cho ngành game tại Việt Nam phát triển nhanh và vững chắc trong thời gian tới. Chúc các bạn có được nhiều thành công vượt bậc trong sự nghiệp phát triển game. Xin chào tạm biệt và hẹn gặp lại!